November 1987 turned out to be cool and calm for Jefferson County, Illinois. This small region was a place where life flowed smoothly and major accidents were rare. Residents knew each other by name, trusted their neighbors, and rarely locked their doors. In the center of this quiet idyll lived the Dardine family, Keith, his wife Elaine, and their 2-year-old son Peter. They were just starting to build their lives, dreaming of the future, but their plans were suddenly destroyed. Keith Dardine, who was 29 years old at the time of the events, was the epitome of hard work and responsibility. Born in a neighboring town, he was distinguished by diligence and conscientiousness from his youth. Working as an operator at a local water treatment plant, Keith made sure his family didn't need anything. He was known as a man with strong moral principles who never left things unfinished. Neighbors described him as a bit restrained, but sincere and reliable person who always came to the rescue. Elaine Dardine, a year older than her husband, was his complete opposite in character. She radiated energy, cheerfulness, and love of life. Coming from a large and close-knit family, Elaine appreciated traditions and tried to make their home a place to return to. She loved doing housework, cooking delicious meals, and paying a lot of attention to the upbringing of their son, Peter. According to her family, Elaine was a woman who always found words of comfort and support. Peter Dardine, a 2-year-old boy with big, curious eyes, was the pride of his parents. Elaine often told friends that nothing brings her greater happiness than to see Peter grow and develop. Keith loved playing ball with his son in the backyard, and in the evenings, they all watched family shows on TV together. Peter grew up in an atmosphere of love and care, surrounded by the warmth of his home. To all this happiness was added the expectation of a second child. Elaine was in the last month of pregnancy, and the family was looking forward to the addition. Keith joked that their house would soon become too small for everyone, but he was already thinking about expanding. They chose names for the future baby, trying to make a choice that everyone would like. Everything indicated that their future would be bright and full of joy. The family's weekdays went like this. Every morning, Keith went to work and Elaine stayed at home doing the housework and raising Peter. In their free time, they often walked around the neighborhood or attended local events. Elaine was a creative person. She often wrote letters to friends and relatives, decorated the house with photographs and homemade decorations. On the eve of Christmas, she had already started preparing holiday souvenirs and was planning how the 3 of them would spend the holiday, and possibly already the 4 of them. The peculiarity of the Keith was its increased caution. A couple of months ago, he refused to let a stranger into the house who asked to spend the night. Keith was firmly convinced that in our time, you can only trust your loved ones. This behavior might seem too strict, but for him, it was a matter of principle. He had to protect his family. However, there was a shadow of uncertainty behind this idyllic picture. Jefferson County, despite its security, was not immune from random crimes. A year before the events, a murder occurred in the neighboring area, which remained unsolved. Perhaps this was what made the whale even more vigilant. Despite this, the family lived their lives, confident that nothing could destroy their idyll. They planned to spend November preparing for the arrival of a new family member and celebrating Christmas. The morning of November 18th, 1987 began as usual in Jefferson County, but soon the tranquility of this quiet place will be disturbed by an alarm bell. One of Keith Dardine's colleagues contacted the police, concerned that Keith had not shown up for work. This was extremely unusual for him, given his well-known punctuality and responsibility. The police decided to check the Dardine's house. The house, located in a secluded area near the city of Ine, looked quiet and still. There was nothing suspicious from the outside. The windows and doors were intact, and there were no signs of disorder on the property. However, no one answered the knock on the door, despite the officers' loud appeals. Attempts to summon any of the family members were unsuccessful. The decision to go inside was made a few minutes later, given the seriousness of the situation. The first thing that struck the police when they opened the door was the absolute silence. The house seemed inanimate inside. Just yesterday, there was the sound of a child laughing, family discussions about the upcoming birth of a second child, and the usual sounds of everyday life. Today, the silence was broken only by the footsteps of the officers moving cautiously around the house. The feeling of emptiness was enhanced by disorder. Furniture was dislodged. Some items fell to the floor and things were scattered throughout the house. It didn't look like a robbery, but rather like the traces of some kind of chaotic struggle. The police noted that some of the furniture was damaged. They noticed bloodstains in the hallway. The tracks led from the living room to one of the bedrooms. These spots became bigger and more saturated as they approached the room that seemed to be the center of everything that had happened. The officers entered the bedroom and were stunned by what they saw. Ruby Elaine Dardine was lying on the bed. Her life tragically ended as a result of a brutal attack. Investigators found that the woman had suffered multiple blunt force injuries. Even experienced police officers were amazed by this incident. But the most frightening thing was that the attack caused premature birth. A baby was found on the bed next to Elaine, who, unfortunately, also did not survive this terrible incident. On the floor nearby was the body of 2-year-old Peter Dardine. According to the investigation, the child was a victim of the same tragedy. The footprints indicated that he was trying to resist. The police officers who examined the crime scene later admitted that it was one of the most brutal crimes they had seen in their entire careers. After searching the rest of the house, the police did not find the head of the family, Russell Keith Dardine. It was as if he had disappeared. At that time, the only logical version seemed to be that the whale could be the culprit of the tragedy and therefore disappeared. This version made it possible to explain the absence of signs of hacking and the involvement of outsiders. The crime scene looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. An inspection of the house and evidence found at the scene did not indicate the presence of strangers. The police knew that Keith was a serious man, known for his adherence to rules and caution. Some friends mentioned that he had a tough personality. All this only increased suspicions about him. While the police were processing the crime scene, the news of the brutal murder of the Dardine family began to spread throughout the district. The residents were shocked by the version about the possible involvement of the Keith in the murder. Neighbors described them as a friendly and happy family. Keith was a responsible employee and a caring father, and the theory that Keith could commit such an atrocity seemed implausible to anyone who knew him intimately. However, the police could not rule out this possibility. In the absence of other suspects, they began to build hypotheses to understand what could have prompted the head of the family to such actions. At the same time, they continued to collect evidence, analyze footprints at the crime scene, and interrogate witnesses. Criminologists worked in the house for several hours, recording everything that could shed light on the events of that night. Traces of blood, scattered items, damage to furniture, all this was recorded. However, many details did not fit into the picture of a domestic conflict. Investigators have begun collecting information about Keith's recent actions in the days leading up to the tragedy. They started by interviewing his colleagues, friends, and neighbors. It was necessary to find out if any strange behavior or suspicious movements had been noticed behind him. However, the results were disappointing for this version. No one noticed anything unusual in Keith's life. His daily routine remained as stable and predictable as ever. He continued to work, communicated with his family and neighbors as usual. At the same time, the police are beginning to investigate his financial activities. They checked his bank accounts to find out if he had withdrawn large amounts of money or made questionable transactions. Nothing like this was found. The financial condition of the Dardine family was in order. Regular expenses related to the house and the needs of the family. Keith's phone records also gave no clues. The last calls he made were related to work and family issues. No conversations indicating conflicts or threats were also found. The police disseminated information about the search for Keith through the media, urging citizens to cooperate. Hospitals, motels, gas stations, and other possible places where he could be were checked. However, despite extensive searches, the first few days yielded no results. The investigators have reached a dead end. They wondered, if Keith really escaped, why didn't he leave any traces? After a while, an important breakthrough was the discovery of Keith's car. The red Plymouth was found in a secluded area about 10 miles from the Dardine's home. The car was parked on the side of the road, and at first glance, it did not look suspicious. The doors were locked, the windows were intact, and there were no signs of a struggle or any kind of incident. The police opened the car for inspection. Everything looked neat inside and out. However, when they opened the trunk, a frightening discovery awaited them. The body of Russell Keith Dardine was there. The evidence indicated that he had been shot at close range, suggesting a targeted killing. The location of the body and the circumstances at the crime scene suggested that Keith was in this car against his will. The killer probably forced him to go to a secluded road where the tragedy occurred. However, the reasons why his body was found separately from the rest of the victims raised many questions. The discovery of the police completely refuted the initial version about his involvement in the murder of the family. It was now clear that he himself had become a victim, as well as his wife and children. Now the investigators had to find out who could have committed such an atrocity. Why did the killer choose this particular family? Did he have a motive, or was it a random choice of victims? Residents began to fear even more for their safety. In a small town, there was a sudden feeling that no one was immune from such a horror. Houses began to be locked, neighbors stopped opening doors, and the police received numerous calls from concerned citizens. The discovery of the whale's body has led to new questions. Why did the killer decide to take him away from the house? Was it an attempt to confuse the investigation? Or was there some personal motive behind it? Could it be that Keith knew his killer and was forced to comply? Criminologists examining the car were trying to find additional evidence, but neither fingerprints nor other traces found in the car allowed to identify the perpetrator. The case became more and more complicated, and the evidence did not provide answers. The first step of the investigation was to study the life of the Dardine family in order to understand if anyone could wish them harm. Keith, Elaine, and Peter, according to friends and neighbors, were friendly people. As far as was known, they had no conflicts in their family or with others that could lead to such a tragedy. The police have studied Keith's work activities in detail. He was an operator at a water treatment plant and performed his duties professionally. His colleagues spoke of him with respect. No evidence was found that Keith might have had conflicts with management or colleagues. The question of whether someone from his professional circle could have been involved in the murder was ruled out. Elaine, who was responsible for Peter's home and upbringing, also had no enemies. According to friends, she was a kind woman who always tried to help others. None of the interviewees could recall any unpleasant incidents related to her name. Her life was dedicated to her family, and her death, like the deaths of her children, seemed devoid of any logical explanation. Investigators began checking to see if the Dardines had faced any threats in the past. Police reports have been reviewed in recent years, but the family has not sought help or protection. There were no threatening calls, attempted theft, or any other incidents. The banking data also indicated a stable and normal financial situation. The Dardines had no debts or conflicts related to money. When the investigation did not find any leads, the police began to consider the theory of a random attack. According to this theory, the criminal could have chosen the Dardine's house by chance to rob it or realize his cruel intentions. However, this version also had weaknesses. Firstly, no signs of a robbery were found in the house. All valuables, including money and jewelry, remained untouched. This cast doubt on the motive of the robbery. Secondly, the brutality of the attack did not fit into the picture of a common crime committed for the purpose of profit. The perpetrator or criminals had displayed extreme brutality that seemed devoid of any logic. By the end of several weeks after the murder, the investigation began to stall. All the versions studied did not lead to specific suspects. The evidence gathered at the crime scene was insufficient. Fingerprints and other footprints did not match any of the databases, and DNA technology had not yet been developed in those years. The public demanded answers, and the police, despite all their efforts, could not offer anything new. The case began to turn into one of those unsolved tragedies that remain a mystery for many years. Further progress was impossible without new evidence or testimony. In 2000, while in prison in Texas, serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells made a shocking confession. He claimed that he was responsible for the brutal murder of the Dardine family in 1987. The prisoner was known as the Coast to Coast Killer. Tommy Lynn Sells was born on June 28, 1964 in Oakland, California. His childhood was marred by poverty, violence, and neglect. At the age of 18 months, he suffered a severe form of meningitis, from which his twin sister died. As a child, Sells was subjected to various kinds of violence, which, according to him, greatly influenced his future life. For more than 2 decades, Sells traveled across the United States, committing crimes in various states. His victims were men, women, and children of various ages. He was arrested in 2000 after 10-year-old Crystal Searles survived his attack and was able to provide police with a description of the perpetrator, which led to his arrest. After his arrest, Sells began confessing to numerous murders, including the murder of the Dardine family. He claimed that in November 1987, he accidentally met Russell Keith Dardine in a parking lot, and he allegedly invited him to his home. According to Sells, he gained the trust of the family and then committed a brutal murder of all its members. However, the details of his story raised doubts among the investigators. Sells was unable to provide convincing evidence of his involvement in this crime. Some details of his confession did not match the known facts of the case. In addition, the police had no physical evidence linking Sells to the crime scene. Despite his statements, the investigators were unable to confirm his involvement in the murder of the Dardine family. Tommy Lynn Sells was known for his penchant for exaggeration and false confessions. He claimed to have committed more than 70 murders, but investigators were only able to confirm about 22 of them. Many of his confessions had no evidence, and some experts believe that he could take responsibility for unsolved crimes in order to increase his fame and importance. In the case of the Dardine family, the lack of concrete evidence and inconsistencies in his story led to his confession not being accepted as the truth. In memory of the Dardine families, local residents erected memorial signs and organized annual events dedicated to their memory. These gatherings serve not only as a tribute to the victims, but also as a way to unite the community in a quest for safety and mutual assistance. The tragedy of the Dardine family has been reflected in various forms of art and media. Documentaries, podcasts, and articles continue to tell about this unsolved crime, drawing attention to the details of the case and causing a public outcry. For example, videos detailing the circumstances of the murder and the course of the investigation are available on the YouTube platform. Despite the years that have passed, law enforcement agencies have not stopped trying to solve this case. Periodically, new versions and evidence appear, which are checked by investigators. The public also actively participates in the discussion and search for information, hoping that one day the truth will be established. The murder of the Dardine family remains one of the most shocking and mysterious crimes in the history of the United States. In 1987, in Jefferson County, Illinois, a tragedy shocked the local community with its cruelty and senselessness. Despite years of investigations, the truth about who committed this crime and why has not been established. The police have put considerable effort into solving this case, examining everything. However, no evidence or testimony gave the investigation the opportunity to identify the suspect. The confession of Tommy Lynn Sells in 2000 seemed like a hope for an answer, but the lack of evidence and his dubious reputation led to the fact that his statement did not become the basis for closing the case. It only added another layer of mystery to this tragedy, and even decades later, the case remains unsolved. It continues to raise questions and attract the attention of the public, researchers, and journalists. The tragedy of the Dardines is not only an example of incredible cruelty, but also a reminder that some crimes, no matter how terrible, can go unanswered. Nevertheless, the memory of Keith, Elaine, Peter, and their unborn child lives on. Their story serves as a reminder of the importance of continuing to seek the truth, even when it seems that all paths have already been exhausted. For their loved ones and all those who were shocked by this event, the hope for justice remains alive.